This week on Off the Air, Mike Puma.
Andrew Posadas, Jimmy Sullivan with you. Pleased to be joined on Off the Air by Mike Puma, Fordham University alum, WFUV alum. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm great, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, anytime. And let's start with kind of the obvious, baseball being back. You've been covering the Mets, but with everything going on with the coronavirus and quarantine, what has your life been like for the last 5 months or so?
You know, it's really been like nothing I've ever experienced. And, I'm 28 years in the media business and covering the Mets for the last 11. And, you know, I just go back to mid-March. I was home from spring training for a week because we get a week off in the middle. And it was that week that I was home that everything started really shutting down. The Big East tournament was going on. You remember that game St. John's and Creighton were playing. They pulled them off the floor at halftime. The NBA shut down. And baseball shut down. So I actually had to go back to Florida the next day, which was a weird experience because, you know, the Mets were still down there in Port St. Lucie after everything shut down for a while. And I just remember going back to Florida on an empty airplane and thinking to myself, wow, you know, what kind of world are we entering here? And I ended up staying back down in Florida for only about 4 or 5 more days before coming home. And, you know, the few months after that, the 3 months after that were unbelievable. You just you didn't know what was going to happen. You didn't know if we were going to have a season. You know, we were trying to keep busy at the Post coming up with material to fill our section, and there wasn't a whole heck of a lot of news because everything had shut down. And then, of course, you know, we had the labor situation. You know, even after everybody got cleared to play again, they still had to hammer out the economic agreement, which was another dicey matter that you didn't know which direction it was going to go. So, but you know, by late June, it was evident that this thing was going to happen. And then, you know, we had summer camp, and here we are into the season now. And you know, knock on wood, hopefully we can finish it.
Yeah, and Mike, now that we do have sports, it has to be a huge transition because for members of the media world, the lack of accessibility to the players, everything being limited to being virtual post pregame conferences. What has that adjustment been like for you? And when do you foresee maybe some sort of normalcy where the media members have maybe some more access? I mean, I don't think in the locker room, maybe that might not be the case anymore. But what do you think about the future of sports media and accessibility to its players?
Yeah, it's really difficult to project right now because, like you said, we're doing everything on Zoom. You're at the mercy of the teams giving you players to talk to before and after the game, and it's tough. You know, a lot of the coverage is the same now because everybody's talking to the same people and getting the same stories here. You don't have the independence that you once had to roam around and seek out different stories. As far as the future, it's tough to project right now. You know, and until you get fans back in the ballpark, I don't think there's going to be any one-on-one interaction with the players. And is that next spring? Is it in the middle of next season? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball to see how this thing is going to shake out. But the Zoom interviews are getting us by, but they're far from ideal.
Yeah, we'll certainly see how that goes into the future. Mike, I want to transition now maybe to more positive stuff and kind of talk about your time at FUV and how it helped your career. You graduated from Fordham and FUV back in '92. What were your first impressions when you got to Fordham, when you started working at FUV? What were your first impressions of the station?
It was unbelievable. You know, I got there my freshman year. I was kind of undecided what route I was going to go. I ended up majoring in biology at Fordham, which is something people give me a hard time about sometimes. They ask me how that biology degree is working out. My freshman year, I didn't work at FUV at all. There were a couple of guys in my dorm who were doing it, so I kind of kept up on, what it was all about and everything through them. I wasn't sure what direction I was going. Sophomore year, I said, you know what, this is something I really want to do. I'm going to take the plunge. And I remember getting there and had an audition. It took me several auditions to get cleared to go on the air. We had to do a 2 or 3 minute sports report, and my writing was kind of rough at the time, and I was kind of long winded. It took me several weeks to get cleared to go on the air. The sports director at the time was Chris Magikowski, who for the last close to 30 years now has been the engineer and the producer on the Mets radio broadcast. I see Madge all the time. Which is pretty funny, but so I got on the air my sophomore year, and I was initially limited to just doing the afternoon updates, the morning updates, and then broke in with one-on-one eventually as the year went on. And if I remember correctly, I didn't start doing any games until my junior year. And for me, that was the thing I wanted to do the most. I liked one-on-one. I liked the report, but I really loved being at the Rose Hill Gym or out at Jack Coffey Field doing the games. And that was the big thrill for me. I got to do a lot of games with Chris Carino, who is now the longtime radio voice of the Brooklyn Nets. Another guy that was there, Pete Saccone, has been at ESPN Radio now for a long time. Those were just fun years. I look back at that time as as much fun as I've ever had.
And Mike, when you think about the guys who were there before you got there in '88, Michael Kay, Bob Papa, Mike Breen, did you feel any pressure? Were they big influences in you wanting to come to Fordham and work at FUV? Was there any pressure when you got there? Because as somebody myself, I didn't go to FUV my freshman year. Also, I kind of felt like maybe I wasn't ready yet. It might have been a little bit too soon for me. But did you feel any pressure just seeing those guys and the fact that they weren't as successful as they were, obviously, but they were on their way? So did you get any pressure as a freshman or just going into Fordham and looking into FUV?
I certainly knew the names at the time. Now, Mike Breen still wasn't doing the Knicks back then. He was still on the rise. And Michael Kay had just made the transition to the Yankee radio booth. He was covering the Yankees for the Daily News at the time. And I think it was my senior year, in the middle of my senior year, when he found out he was going to be doing the Yankees. So Bob Papa was another one. You knew who those guys were, certainly. I don't think there was a pressure, but I think it gave you the idea that, hey, if you succeeded there, that you'd have a chance to do something special. And you brought up the point as far as coming to Fordham. The name that really attracted me when I was applying to schools, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to Fordham or, I applied to a bunch of different places, but I had found out through a newspaper article that Vin Scully had gone to Fordham. And growing up in the 80s, watching NBC baseball, Vin was just as good as anything I'd ever heard. So I think that is what put Fordham on the map for me. I'm not saying I went to Fordham because Vin went there, but it put Fordham on the map that Vin Scully graduated from there. And then when it came time, I narrowed down a few schools. I liked Fordham. And, the fall of '88 is when I arrived.
Mike, let me ask, because you referenced Chris Carino and Pete Saccone and some of the guys that you worked with in your time at Fordham. How fun was it to either call games or do one-on-one or do other stuff with those guys?
I enjoyed it. I think I worked mostly with Chris. We were kind of the A team on basketball my senior year, which happens to be the last year Fordham went to the NCAA tournament. And I did a bunch of games with Carino that year. And back then, you could already tell he was something special. He was so smooth, polished. We had Marty Glickman as our broadcast coach back then. And for me, that was a big deal because now a lot of New Yorkers obviously knew Marty Glickman from his time doing the Giants, the Jets, the Knicks. But I had grown up in Connecticut, and Marty Glickman had done UConn basketball near the end of his career for 4 or 5 years. So I grew up a little bit listening to him call UConn basketball. And, in Chris, you could just tell right away he was going to be something special. He actually got to do there was a contest back then where among the colleges where they would pick you would send in a tape, and they would pick a guy to do a half of a Knicks or a Rangers game. And as a senior, Chris got to do I'm not sure if it was a quarter or I think it was a half. Got to do a half of a Knicks game. And, just listening to that, he sounded like he belonged back then. So we did a lot of games that year, my senior year, when Fordham made the NCAA tournament. I remember doing the Patriot League final. We beat Bucknell out in Bethlehem, PA. And then I had a big decision to make after that. I had booked a spring break trip that was going to coincide with Fordham being in the NCAA tournament. So I had to choose between doing the game with Chris and going on spring break. I had never gone on spring break before, so I went to Jamaica. I missed Fordham getting crushed by UMass in the first round of the NCAA tournament. I think I made the right decision. But, looking back on that, it's hard to believe that's the last time the men's basketball team went to the tournament.
And Mike, you touched on it briefly, but you said your favorite thing was calling games, but obviously you had the chance to report and to cover professional teams in New York, which is the biggest market in the sports world. So how was that as a young reporter, now that you have over 20 plus years under your belt? How was that when you look back on your early reporting times? How was that for you to be in those locker rooms amongst these professional teams?
I'll tell you who got me my first professional media credential. It was between the summer between my sophomore and junior year. I wrote a letter to John Sterling, and he was just at the beginning of his run as the Yankees radio voice. And I think he was maybe 2 years into it at that point. A lot of people still didn't know who he was at that point. He wasn't the legend that he is today. So I wrote him a letter telling him I'm a young broadcaster at Fordham. I thought he was terrific. I'd love to meet him sometime. Sure enough, I put my phone number on it. Sure enough, he calls. I think it was before a game when in the Yankees at that point where those were rough years. The Stump Merrill era, they had some bad teams. And John invites me down to the stadium. He says, I'm going to leave you a media credential. We could talk before the game. And that was the first professional credential I got. So I went down to Yankee Stadium with my tape recorder, worked the clubhouse before the game, talked to different players. And that was now, I see FUV all the time around the local ballparks, but back then it was a little bit different in that we really didn't send guys out that much. So I think I might have been one of the first. Maybe they had done it previously before I was there, but when I was there, they weren't doing that a lot. So I was one of the guys who got out there, got sound from players, and it was a great experience. I'm still thankful to John to this day for what he did, and he's I think he's done that for a lot of young broadcasters over the years.
Mike, you mentioned FUB being everywhere, and you could see that whenever in the past you would watch a Mets or Yankees post game or any of the other professional teams. I actually remember when the Last Dance, the Michael Jordan documentary was on, and I saw an FUV microphone in the shot because I think they were playing the Nets or the Knicks. I don't remember exactly who, but in the last 20 or 25 years, FUV has really expanded, especially in sports with covering professional teams. How impressed have you been by that, being that you're in a lot of those same clubhouses as well?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that you see them everywhere, Yankee Stadium, Citi Field. Now, I'm not out at the Garden a lot, but I'm sure they're there. And you look at just the pipeline that's developed over the last couple of decades, the guys that have come out of Fordham, Spiro Ditas, one name right at the tip of my tongue who came out, who's had a great career. FUV, I know there's kind of a rivalry, I guess, between a little mini rivalry between Syracuse and Fordham, maybe who's producing the most guys. you got to put Fordham right there with Syracuse as far as the quality of guys that have come out.
And Mike, just in your 4 years at Fordham, is there any one moment, any one game, maybe one reporting assignment that sticks out among the rest?
Let me think about that. Let's see. Any one game,
A broadcast, anything that sticks out that you will always remember in your time at Fordham?
I remember that Patriot League final, just when Fordham won to get to the NCAA tournament. That was one of the games, and I didn't do this game, but the game that stands out was Fordham beat Seton Hall when I was a student there, which was a big deal because Seton Hall was a national power at the time. I just remember the students coming out of the stands onto the floor there, and it was quite a scene. I remember the first football game I ever did. It was with Chris Carino. Fordham played Holy Cross. It was a driving rain. I mean, holy cow! I don't know how it was pouring, and Fordham football was on lean times back then. Holy Cross crushed them, but I remember, I guess you remember your first. I remember that. I remember my first play-by-play was actually a Fordham Adelphi basketball game. They had played Adelphi because they couldn't get. I think Boston College had backed out of playing them at the last minute or something like that. I remember the one-on-ones. I was big on getting guests on one-on-one, which was something that wasn't done a lot back then either. We were, at the time, most of the guys just were content to go on, take phone calls for a few hours and talk to us. But I remember getting PJ Carlissimo to come on one time, who's a Fordham alum. John Sterling came on with me. I used to get various guys. I got Terry Tata, who was a longtime National League umpire, came on for like an hour one time. Those shows were fun when you would get guests like that, and you could just talk to them.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Mike, I wanted to ask, because you've made a really seamless transition from being in college and working at FUV to now being a writer and a reporter. You've been with the New York Post for a number of years. Did you find that FUV helped you at all in making that transition? I know it's two different forms of media, but do you think having that experience is helping you now?
I think it certainly helped when I went back to covering pro sports. Now, after I graduated, I went back home to Connecticut. I didn't know what direction I was going to go. ESPN Radio had just started my senior year when I graduated. So I was able to get in up there when a few months after they had launched. I was a production assistant. So I was working part-time. They were only weekend programming at that point. So I was working on the weekends part-time with them. I needed some other stuff to do, and that's how I got into print, actually. The local newspaper was looking for kind of entry-level guys, and I had been doing at that point, I had hooked on doing some high school football play-by-play. So the sports editor of the local paper had heard me on the radio broadcasts, and even though I didn't have any writing experience, just thought I'd be a good addition to the staff as somebody who knew the local high school football scene. And so that's kind of how my print career got started. So I was doing a few different jobs simultaneously, and it got to the point where I realized I really liked the print side of the business. And so I went in that direction. I worked up in Waterbury for 5 years, then went to the Connecticut Post in Bridgeport for another close to 10 years, where I was covering a variety. That's where I really got in with the pro sports, was at the Connecticut Post. I was kind of the New York guy. I'd do the Yankees, Mets, Jets, Giants. You'd bounce around a lot, and that was a tremendous amount of fun. And that's really where I got cut my teeth covering baseball. Was doing my first baseball assignments were 1998, which was right when the Mets were on the rise and the Yankees had the historic team that won 125 games. So that's really where I got to begin with the pro sports, and then spent close to 10 years there. Went to the New York Post in 2007. Kind of as a backup baseball guy, and I've been on the Mets now for the last 11 years. So a lot of baseball I've seen over the last 2 decades.
Mike, this is a very cliche question, but I have to ask. If you could go back and talk to a young freshman, Mike Puma, in the fall of 1988, what advice would you give him?
You know what? The first thing I think about that sometimes, I should have gotten in at I should have done it my freshman year at FUV. You know, had some trepidation. I kind of wanted to feel things out a little bit. I should have hit the ground running, I think. And maybe that would have pushed me more toward a broadcast career. I don't know. Maybe there would have been more opportunities on the broadcast side if I had done that. But I think the other thing I would do is just get involved with more stuff as far as internships and getting to know as many people as possible. Now, my senior year, I did an internship with Yankees Magazine, so I'd go to Yankee Stadium, and it's funny. You don't think much of it. You're helping out in the office and not doing a lot of big stuff, but it's something you can put on a resume. And when I got hired at my local paper up in Waterbury, Connecticut, out of school, that was one of the things the sports editor asked about. He's like, "Wow, you were an intern for Yankees Magazine." So that was one thing that kind of stood out. So that's what I would say. Just get involved, doing as much as you can off campus if the opportunities are there.
Mike, before we let you go, in reading about you and doing some preparation for this interview, I understand you have a book coming out next year. It's called If These Walls Could Talk New York Mets, and that's a question I've often asked myself a lot. But can you tell us a little bit more about that project without giving too much of the details of the book away?
Well, it's coming out next spring, right before the start of the 2021 baseball season. It's basically going to entail the 2 decades plus that I've been around the Mets, starting with the Valentine era and working into the Subway Series with the Yankees and Mets, and I kind of go right through the end of the Terry Collins era a few years ago, and it's just different stories about some of the behind the scenes stuff that maybe you don't see all the time. And I'm very thankful for all the people that took time to talk to me for the book. I got to reconnect with guys like Mike Piazza, and David Wright was nice enough. I think I interviewed him 3 separate times for the book. Keith Hernandez. I talked to about 3 dozen people extensively. I think there's some stories in there that'll create a little buzz. I'm looking forward to this. It's my first book. I didn't know if I'd ever do a book, and I was like, you know what? I had this opportunity. I'm going to give it a whirl, so I'm looking forward to it.
He's Mike Puma of the New York Post, WFUV alum. Again, his new book, If These Walls Could Talk New York Mets, coming out next spring. Mike, thank you so much for the time today. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Mike.